Alrighty, good morning, everyone. I just finished off my coffee while getting this deck list together. I had to make two budget substitutions. I don't have two Plague Engineers, so I swapped one out in the side for an Ensnaring Bridge, and I only have three Surgicals for some reason, so I swapped a fourth Surgical out for an Extirpate. And today we will be playing Blue-Black Mill. This is a list that 5-0'd on Magic online on a tournament, but this accounts for a very small portion of the metagame, so I'm still going to count it as jank, because Mill is just burn but worse. And I'm really excited. I love Mill decks, mainly because you get to play Ancestral Recall. This is one of my favorite things about Modern, is usually you can find a piece of the Power 9 that you can play in your deck, as long as you follow certain restrictions. Like if you play Ad Nauseam, you can play Black Lotus, because you're playing Lotus Bloom. If you're playing Mill, you can play Ancestral Recall, etc. Interesting, this version does run Drown in the Loch. I have not seen a version of Mill that runs Drown in the Loch yet, but then again, I haven't been paying much attention. So we're going to see how this does today. Excited because this does have Fraying Sanity. Yeah, of course, stream favorite, Hedron Crab, also making an appearance in this deck. But I'm rambling too long, so let's just get right into a Modern League. Alrighty, round one, here we go. One of my favorite facts about Archive Trap Mill is it is the only deck that has a theoretical turn 0 win. That's like an actual playable deck. I'm not talking like, oh, well, my deck has 4 Chancellor of the Dross and 4 Soul Spikes, so if I draw all of those in my opening hand, I can kill my opponent. No, this is a legitimate meta deck that can potentially kill its opponent on their first turn before playing a land. Which, I mean, is always the dream. I've never seen it happen. I've only heard legends. But it is theoretically possible. We are going to keep this hand. It's a little light on Mill, but we can kind of hide what we're doing a little bit. And I think, despite having Hedron Crab in the deck, I think we do start Prismatic Vista because we might want to Cling to Dust. If our opponent starts off and it turns out they're Dredge, Cling to Dust is going to be very important. Man, I really want to build a Chancellor of the Dross Soul Spike deck now. I did build Pitch Control, and I do have Liliana's, and Pitch Control was way more competitive than it had any right to be. So maybe we do that. That might be a fun thing to try. Are we getting an Inquisition? So I am going to fetch for a Black Source here. Get a Swamp. I just want to make sure that my opponent doesn't have like a bunch of Pillages or something. Our opponent is playing Boggles. Well, we'll take Spirit Dancer, and now our opponent has no action whatsoever. Play an island, pass the turn. My opponent does not have any fetch lands in hand. In fact, my opponent may not have fetch lands at all. So we're going to see how this goes. Field of Ruin, the only thing that can force your opponent to search their library in Modern, which does turn on Archive Trap, thankfully. Can we untap? We draw Shelldock Isle. Yeah, let's Glimpse the Unthinkable this turn. Next turn we can field Archive Trap and then Ancestral Recall, and that'll be fantastic. So we mill a ton of Boggles, play Shelldock Isle, and we're gonna go get, I think Fraying Sanity. Rest to the bottom any order. Pass the turn. Man, I haven't seen Shelldock Isle since Vintage Cube. How you doing, Shelldock Isle? Good? That's good. Going a little wacko? That's okay. We'll share your madness with our opponent. It's a weird morning today, everybody. I woke up, like, last night, I've recorded all of the Mono Blue Tron League that I posted. So that was yesterday's video for you guys. It was last night's video for me. And then I was like, alright, I'm going to take a little bit longer to get ready this morning. I'll eat breakfast, etc. And, like, I feel like I'm going a little wacky. Alright. Opponent plays a Glade Cover Scout. Probably lands 2 6/10, I guess. Unless this is a Rancor, in which case that might have been preemptive. Alright, well if they want to draw extra cards, they are welcome to draw extra cards, because that's what I call milling yourself. Alright, we untap. We draw another Visions of Beyond. Okay. Well, this hand is going to be pretty nasty. So we Field of Ruin, hitting Sun Petal Grove, and we Archive Trap, and then we have 6 draws to try and hit more Archive Traps. So I feel like this is an appropriate time to do this. Not to mention, if we draw Surgical, we can Surgical Daybreak Coronet on their draw step, which is pretty gross. I think one of my favorite highlights I've ever done is I have a video on my channel, I'll have to look it up, but it's called like Best Surgical of All Time. It's a meme video that I made, and it is fantastic. I gotta get back to doing those. Alright, so we field our opponent. They get a white source so that they have access to path. We archive trap our opponent. Okay. We could just put down a Fraying Sanity. They'll mill 13 more cards that way. I like the draws better, though. The option to, like, potentially surgical if we get it is just better, I think. Alright, there's another archive trap. If we hit a third archive trap, our opponent's just dead. Alright, get him with the old archive trap Tron. The other nice thing about mill is you get a good idea of what your opponent's playing and all of their secret tech in their main deck. So, this is a very efficient game one. I'm glad I decided to do the Inquisition on my opponent there, because had my opponent stuck that core Spirit Dancer, we might actually be dead. Man, have you ever cast 2 Ancestral Recalls in one turn? And then 3 0-mana spells? Not usually in Modern. And an Archive Trap to mill 13 more cards shall take our opponent to 0 cards in Library. That's a spicy deck list. It looks to be a little bit budget, because we have Sixth Sense instead of Keen Sense. I think Keen Sense is like slightly more... I don't see any Spider Umbras. I only see Rancors. Yeah, so unfortunately my opponent is not playing fetch lands. Okay, so what do we do for a deck not running fetch lands? We could bring in... I think Echoing Truth is actually kind of reasonable. It doesn't hit their creatures, but it can hit their better auras. We're going to have to, like, charge up Archive Traps for a Field of Ruin turn. But I think Ensnaring Bridge definitely comes in here. And actually, Plague Engineer does, because if we name Elf, they can no longer play Glade Cover Scout. If we name Boggle, they can no longer play Boggles. Maybe not. Maybe not on the Plague Engineer. We'll see. That's probably going to be a Game 3 consideration, if anything. Drown in the Loch and Fatal Push are also terrible. Fatal Push does hit Core Spirit Dancer, and Drown in the Loch is technically a counterspell. But, like, against the Hexproof, I don't know, it just doesn't feel good. I think we go down some number of Fatal Push, and go down maybe a Drown in the Loch or 2. I'm going to bring in the other Cling to Dust. Gaining life repeatedly is good, and potentially just using it as a cantrip for something to do with our black mana is good. Aether Gust might be nice, because we could stick an aura back on top of the deck. I don't like reactive answers against Boggles, because they're probably as proactive as you can get. So we're going to try it like this and see what happens. Hopefully our opponent did not anticipate the Ensnaring Bridge, because if Boggles player did not anticipate the Snaring Bridge, they're going to lose. Because they absolutely must have artifact removal, and they don't run any in the main deck. Okay, well, we have our good friends, Hedron Crab and Fraying Sanity in our opening hand, along with Mesmeric Orb. So we're going to keep this. Our opponent did mulligan. It's the secret tech of sticking an extra card or 2 back in your deck against mill. So what would I like to draw? I would like to draw... something to play off of our fetch land mana. Okay, opponent starts Razor Verge Thicket. And a Glade Cover Scout. We untap. We draw Visions of Beyond. Play the Crab. Pass the turn. Honestly, if my opponent paths, that helps. Like, we don't have to mill them a ton, we really just need mana to dump our hand out, so we can get this bridge down as quickly as possible, and have it be effective. Of course, our opponent has a tendency to make their creatures tall, so they're not going to be able to get around the bridge very easily. Okay. No attacks. Does our opponent not have any auras? What are they holding? Sorry, my voice hasn't had as much time to rest as it normally does, and I'm drinking water and, you know, trying to do what I can, but if you hear me clearing my throat a lot, I do apologize. Opponent says, misplayed. With 3 S's and an ID on played. Alright, second main phase, they're going to Ethereal Armor. Alright. We draw another Visions of Beyond, so play Polluted Delta. Save targets, always yield. Okay, we mill 6 Sense, Glade Cover, and Rancor. Then we're going to fetch up. I think it's fine to just get an island. Mill our opponent again. Core Spirit Dancer, Sun Petal Grove, and Spirit Mantle. And then we're going to run out Mesmeric Orb. Pass the turn. Depending on how big this Glade Cover Scout gets, I might block it with the Crab. It's not... But unless it gets huge, it doesn't gain Trample or Spirit Mantle, which it tends to do when it gets huge. Opponent mills a Daybreak Coronet. Okay, they play a Forest. Alright, opponent plays a Rancor. So blocking with the Crab no longer is effective. Okay, they attack for 5. You got it, opponent. No blocks, we'll take 5. Kind of hoping to draw an untapped land to get this Ensnaring Bridge down. Okay. Mesmeric Orb, we mill 2 of our own cards. We mill a Surgical Extraction, which we really didn't want to draw. And another Ensnaring Bridge. Draw Inquisition, so start Shelldock Isle. Mill our opponent and hide away. We're going to hide away, I guess, just a Crab. Go ahead and steal one of their remaining 2 cards out of hand. If possible, of course. They're both lands. Okay. So then we're going to Visions of Beyond. Just because we need to cantrip here. Wouldn't mind drawing another land, but I don't think my opponent can get through this Ensnaring Bridge anytime soon. So we're going to take another nasty hit. Hopefully it's not from some crazy power level aura. I think the best of which they could draw is Daybreak Coronet, but like... Opponent's going to mill 2. They mill Hyena Umbra and Daybreak Coronet. We have not seen any artifact or enchantment destruction yet, which either means our opponent didn't bring it in or they have very few copies of it. Okay. They do have an aura they want to play. Or a Boggle. Could be a Boggle. It's a Boggle. Okay. Opponent attacks for 5. No blocks. We'll take 5 and go to 9. Interesting they didn't play the tap land this turn. Okay, we mill 3. So we mill Surgical Extraction, Mesmeric Orb, and an island. Draw Swamp. Swamp's fine. So play a Swamp, mill our opponent. They mill Plains, Spirit Dancer, and Sun Petal Grove. And we'll just play an Ensnaring Bridge. And if our opponent does not have Artifact Destruction anywhere in their deck, I think we just beat them. If we can get close to emptying out our hand here, like if we play a Fraying Sanity, Mesmeric Orb is no longer like dangerous to us in the slightest. It's a way to break the symmetry of Mesmeric Orb. So opponent mills a 6 Sense and a Boggle. They're holding Razor Verge Thicket 1 unknown. Okay, no attacks from our opponent, predictably. We untap, we mill a few cards. Mesmeric Orb, Crypt Incursion, and a Polluted Delta. We draw another Crab. Play Crab. Enchant our opponent with Fraying Sanity. And pass the turn. Basically any mill spell, and we're good. We'll have a lot of draws to hit mill spells, too. We do have to be careful, and not get too greedy and draw a million cards. Because if we do, then our opponent can attack through Ensnaring Bridge. Okay? They play a Glade Cover Scout and a Razor Verge Thicket. And they pass. Okay. Fraying Sanity procs, but of course they don't mill anything. We mill Glimpse the Unthinkable, Archive Trap, Prismatic Vista, and Polluted Delta. We get an island. So let's mill our opponent for 6. We'll cast a Visions of Beyond here. Cling to Dust. We'll hit a Boggle, just to gain a little life. And then pass the turn. Oh man. We're going to cast a Crab off of Shelldock Isle now, and we'll have assembled Crabtron. The best of all of the Trons. Alright, opponent mills an Ethereal Armor and a Forest. I mean, this game's been locked up for a couple of turns now. I don't think that we've got any real problems left. And of course, as soon as we untap, our opponent is out of the game. Cast the Crab. Crabtron assembled. Okay. Opponent mills 1 card, we mill 4. The 4th Crab, another Archive Trap. Glimpse the Unthinkable and Ensnaring Bridge. We draw Obero. So play Field of Ruin. Mill our opponent for 9. I'm still not seeing any artifact destruction. If they had it in hand, they obviously would have cast it, so mill them for 9. They only have 6 cards left, so that should be the game. They fail to find. They mill Forest Boggle Plains, and the last 3, Rancor Spirit Mantle Path. Opponent did not bring in Artifact Disruption. So, for all of you paying attention at home, that was part 1 of our series, Humiliating Hexproof. I'll see you guys in round 2. Alright, round 2, here we go. Let's hope our luck from round 1 holds up. Okay. Yep, I think this is fine. We'll keep. I know, like I said, we're supposed to save fetch lands for crabs. However, I think, especially against a red deck, playing Sacred Foundry, we are going to want Inquisition. Opponent starts Swift Spear and hits us for 1. We take 1 and go to 19. Untap. We draw an Archive Trap. So play Prismatic Vista, fetch up a Swamp. Crypt Incursion should do a lot of work against our opponent. Eidolon, Lava Spike, Rift Bolt, Searing Blaze. My opponent kept a 1-lander. Huh. I think we have to take an Eidolon. I understand my opponent has 2 burn spells, but like, Eidolon of the Great Revel really, really sucks to play against. So, okay. A turn off auto yields in case they play a fetch land. Okay, opponent just straight up casts a Lava Spike with no remorse. We go to 15. They get in for 2. We go to 13. Untap. We draw Fatal Push. Play an island. I think I'm going to save Fatal Push just in case they actually do get down Eidolon. And do we play Mesmeric Orb or do we play Glimpse? I think Mesmeric Orb, actually. I was going to go with Glimpse, trying to get as many cards into their grave as possible. But we do have to think about, like, mill per turn kind of a thing going on here. And Mesmeric Orb will probably get us more value in the long run. They mill a land, which is good. Opponent suspends a Rift Bolt. Goes to combat. Gets in for 1. Sure. So we untap. We mill 2. So it's unlikely my opponent has just Lightning Bolt. So we can Field of Ruin, killing Sacred Foundry, Archive Trap them, and Fatal Push their only threat, which sets them behind a great deal. If I draw another Archive Trap, I'm almost certainly going to do that. If not, I might just Shell Dot Glimpse. We'll see. We mill Archive Trap and Visions of Beyond. And we draw Fraying Sanity. Fraying Sanity might be the better play here. So that guarantees our opponent mills 4. And then they're going to mill 26. Yeah, I think we play Fraying Sanity on our opponent. Because we have Fatal Push, Eidolon is at most a 2-mana, 2-damage burn spell. That does not trigger Prowess. We would still like to draw a Crypt Incursion, though. That's a spell that burn usually cannot beat. Okay, Rift Bolt coming off of Suspend. Hitting us in the face. Triggering Prowess. We milled a Mountain and a Lava Spike. Another Lava Spike. So we're going down to 3. So Drown in the Loch would be a good draw. So would Crypt Incursion. Okay, opponent mills a couple extra cards. They mill Goblin Guide and a few more lands. Come on, Crypt Incursion. I would also take the 1-mana black spell to gain life. That would be good too. Okay, milling ourselves for 3. We milled Drown in the Loch, Visions of Beyond, and... or no, Drown in the Loch, Shelldock Isle, and Glimpse. We draw Glimpse. So... play Shelldock Isle. Surgical Extraction, Fraying Sanity. or Visions of Beyond. We're going to put Fraying Sanity underneath, because that should just give us a combo kill. Kind of a risky field here. If my opponent's holding an instant speed burn spell, of course, we're just dead. We'll get a Swamp. Archive Trap my opponent. Mill them for 13, and then we'll mill them for 13 at our end step. Alright, we mill a bunch of good cards. Fatal Push now. Pass the turn. We basically just have to hope they don't draw another Lava Spike or Lightning Bolt or Rift Bolt. Skewer the Critics might be okay, because they probably can't cast it, but they top deck Lightning Bolt because we're always dead to Bolt. Except that one time we weren't. Man, that was a glorious time, wasn't it? Okay, so versus Burn. Versus Burn, I think Aether Gust and Cling to Dust come in. And what goes out? Versus Burn, I think Mesmeric Orb might actually be too slow. Because, like, the rest of our spells are actually really good versus them. And Mesmeric Orb is, like, slightly middling. Ensnaring Bridge could be good, but a lot of their creatures have very low power. And I think it's a little hard for this deck to actually get down that low. Because we do run, like, a bunch of 3-drops and stuff. Maybe we drop our last Mesmeric Orb for an Ashiok. I could see that. Yeah, this is really weird, but I think bringing in Ensnaring Bridge is not right here. We have so many Inquisitions, Fatal Pushes, and Drown in the Locks. I think Ensnaring Bridge needs to stay on the side. We'll play first. Alright, we have Fatal Push, Archive Trap, Surgical Extraction, and pretty much everything else we'd ever want. So we're going to start Darkslick Shores and pass the turn. The only way this hand would get better, I think, is if we had an Inquisition instead of a Fraying Sanity, but if my opponent starts with a fetch land, I am going to Archive Trap them. Okay, they start Goblin Guide. Well, that's going to get pushed off a cliff. Visions of Beyond on top of our deck. Okay. Goblin Guide bites the dust. We untap. We draw Visions of Beyond. So, play Field of Ruin. Pass the turn, and I think I'm going to use mana to Surgical that Goblin Guide on my opponent's draw step. They have Eidolon, Lava Spike, Lightning Bolt. Actually, hang on. Get the old snipping tool out. There we go. So we'll exile Goblin Guide. Okay. So they play a Swift Spear. Okay. They go to combat, get in for 1. Okay, we go to 19. We untap, we draw Inquisition. So if we were to Inquisition right now, they have Eidolon, Lava Spike, Lightning Bolt, Skewer, and 2 Skull Cracks. We would probably just take Eidolon, I think. But I think playing Polluted Delta, fetching an island, and playing Fraying Sanity on our opponent is probably what we should be doing this turn. Okay, Fraying Sanity doesn't do anything right now because our opponent hasn't milled anything. Opponent untaps. They do have a Sunbaked Canyon. They probably have to play Eidolon. Okay, they cast Lava Spike. And probably Skewer then. Yep. Okay, so we're taking a whopping 9 damage this turn. If we field them, this turns on Lightning Bolt. So without a compelling reason to do that, we probably shouldn't. So we can mill them for 26, turn on Visions of Beyond, but our opponent gets to Lightning Bolt. Oh, we can Inquisition first. This does slow them down significantly. If we can take their Lightning Bolt, which is the only thing they can do on our turn, they're casting 1 spell a turn until we die. Okay, I no longer need the Snipping Tool because my opponent's hand has been officially revealed. Play Overo. Field Sunbaked Canyon. And we'll get an island. Then we Archive Trap them. They go to 19 cards in Graveyard. I shouldn't have exiled that Goblin Guide, because then we could Visions of Beyond before Fraying Sanity trigger, and might just be able to kill them if we hit more not Ensnaring Bridges, but you know what I mean. So Visions of Beyond, we'll draw 3 cards. We get an Aether Gust, a Crab, and a Watery Grave. Not terrible cards here. Okay, opponent plays a Wooded Foothills. They're going to crack it now because they don't have that many cards left in their deck. They did shock for some reason. They get in for 1. They played an Eidolon. So we untap. We draw Ashiok. So our opponent is playing a Skullcrack next turn. This Eidolon's a little bit of a problem. Ashiok, we can make our opponent mill 8 cards this turn. And we can play Crab and make them mill 6 more. Oh, they're just dead. They can Skullcrack us at their upkeep, but that doesn't do anything, I don't think. Okay, start Crab. Take damage. I think we'll be at 1. No. Hang on. If I play Ashiok, we go to 4. Okay. Yeah, as long as I don't shock Watery Grave, we're fine. So, Watery Grave tapped. Mill our opponent. Play Ashiok. This person did bring in Artifact Destruction, so I'm glad we took out all of our artifacts. Okay, mill our opponent for 8. So they're going to lose their entire deck to the Fraying Sanity trigger. And then on their upkeep, they can cast Skullcrack, but they can only cast 1, taking us to 1. I guess if they had hit a... if they were playing Lava Dart, they could have hit Lava Dart and killed us. But hey, we beat them. Alright, so we're going on to game 3. Do we want to make any adjustments, knowing what we know now? I think Ensnaring Bridge is still incorrect. I think my opponent's deck is just too fast. Set Adrift is a way to deal with Eidolon that doesn't we won't take damage for. The problem is, though, Set Adrift is best when you're milling yourself, which means it's best when we have Mesmeric Orb in the deck. So I think we just run it back and hope for a bunch of Archive Traps off of our opponent's fetch, and then, like, have a Crypt Incursion in hand. Because if we cast a Crypt Incursion and our opponent can't Skullcrack in response, we just win. Alright, I wish this was a blue land and not a black land, but I will keep. Okay, opponent starts Inspiring Vantage, notably not a fetch land. And a Swift Spear. They did mulligan, though, so hopefully their power is stymied by that. We untap. We draw Polluted Delta. Play Polluted Delta. Pass the turn. I'd like to play Crab next turn, when we can get a little bit of guaranteed value out of it. Because, like, if we played it now, our opponent could just bolt, and then we'd have a bad time. They do fetch up a Sacred Foundry. And they Boros Charm us. Well, Archive Trap our opponent. We're taking 6 damage this turn. I'm somewhat tempted to fetch a Swamp to Cling to Dust, but if I do that, I can't play Crab before playing a fetch land next turn. So we are going to fetch a Watery Grave tapped. Untap. We draw Obero. Play Crab. Play Prismatic Vista. Target our opponent. Save targets, always yield. Okay. Fetch up our second Swamp. And we're going to Cling to Dust, taking out a Swift Spear. And we're doing it now so that our opponent does not have Skullcrack mana, basically. Okay. What we draw will heavily dictate what we play next turn. We're probably just going to play Field and hold up Drown. But if we drew... I actually think we're probably doing that regardless. I don't know what line we could have that's better. Oh, 1 second. I'm getting a phone call. Flamekeeper Jod, I'm calling you out. How dare you call me when I'm recording? You know better than that. Alright. Opponent top decked a land, so they're going to sack Sunbaked Canyon. 2 mana, they're going to play Eidolon, so we are going to counter that spell. At worst, next turn we're gaining 3 life off of Cling to Dust Escape, which is pretty good. When it gets in for 1, we go to 6. We draw Fraying Sanity. Play Field, and we're going to Cling to Dust, getting rid of Eidolon. Exile 5 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just want to be out of multiple bolt range. So opponent top decks another Eidolon, because of course they do. They get in for 1. Okay, well we need some good cards. Really hoping for Crypt Incursion. Okay, Extirpate. We'll play Obero. So what cards do they have in exile? Swift Spear and Eidolon. We're looking for a card in their grave that does damage that they only have one of in their grave, if at all possible. So my opponent has multiple Rift Bolts. In fact, I think almost all of their Rift Bolts. My opponent has multiple Skewers. Okay. I see one Lightning Bolt, two Lightning Bolts, Lava Spike, lots of Lava Spikes, okay? Lots of Boros Charms. So unfortunately, other than Smash to Smithereens, which doesn't do anything to us, it looks like they have basically all of their cards in duplicates. So we need to hit, I think, Skewer the Critics or Lightning Bolt. We could just play Fraying Sanity this turn. We would take 2 damage. They would hit us for 3. If they draw a Bolt, we die. Maybe that means we don't play anything and we try and draw Crypt Incursion next turn. I think that's what that means. I'll feel really silly if we top deck an Archive Trap. We could actually extirpate their Sunbaked Canyons, but that would increase their chance of drawing something that'll kill us. Alright, well they top decked a Sunbaked Canyon, so they're going to crack it and draw a card. Alright, they go to combat. They hit us for 3 down to 5. Skewer down to 2. Okay, that kills us because the only thing that we can cast now is Archive Trap. And because we don't have a spell that can remove Eidolon, any spell we cast, we just die to the trigger. Yeah. Alright, that's a little bit unfortunate. And if we'd extirpated Skewer, which would have been the least likely of the cards I would have extirpated, our opponent probably would have drawn a different burn spell. So, unfortunately, we can't close it out versus burn, and we lose round 2. However, it was very close. I'll see you guys in round 3. Alright, round 3, here we go. This is extremely tempting. And if that Field of Ruin was a watery grave, I think I would actually keep it. A watery grave or a fetch land. But I gotta mulligan that. This hand is not much better. I'm actually gonna mulligan this one too. We're going to 5. This I think I can get behind. So we're gonna keep. I'm gonna put back 2 cards. So I'm gonna put back Drown and probably Crypt Incursion. Best possible top deck from this position would be a fetch land. That is the next best possible top deck, is just any land. So, play Hedron Crab. Pass the turn. Double Crab early with fetch lands is really, really quick mills. Okay, opponent plays Dryad Arbor, so this looks like Boggles again. We untap. We draw Cling to Dust. Play Hedron Crab. Play Field. Target our opponent. Target our opponent. Save targets always yield. Now if our opponent has Path... Oh, it's Infect. Alright. So I'm going to Surgical Glistener Elf on their draw step. You should always draw step Surgical unless there's a better line with Surgical for you. Like Edge Case, hitting a burn spell they might draw, that kind of a thing. Because you might be able to Surgical the card they drew, which turns Surgical into a sort of like Raven's Crime in addition to Grave Hate, in addition to a Memoricide, which makes it awesome. The best part is you can do this with no mana. So opponent has to spend mana this turn to counter Surgical, meaning they are holding Glistener Elf. Okay, that would have been amazing. We could have potentially done that on our turn to prevent them from countering that, but, you know, it's whatever. Alright, pass the turn. If our opponent can kill us here, they can kill us here. The Drown in the Loch, odds are it wouldn't save us anyway, because they would certainly have protection for this. So no blocks. Okay, Mutagenic Growth, Mutagenic Growth, Mutagenic Growth. Man, could you imagine if I had Surgical Mutagenic Growth? That would have been a Memoricide and a Delirium Skynes. Alright. Well, there's some argument that maybe we should have blocked, but I don't know. Alright. So versus what our opponent is doing. kind of like Mystical Dispute, just a little bit. It may not actually be the best here. Cling to Dust is only a cantrip. Like, the life gain's not going to be relevant. Which also means Crypt Incursion, the life gain is not going to be relevant. So we'll bring in Aether Gust. And I'm going to cut a Visions of Beyond. In fact, I'm going to cut more than one. Because while it's good, it's going to be... the hard part of this matchup is getting to the point where Visions of Beyond is going to be good. So we have to focus on trying to get that far. It's possible we bring in an Ensnaring Bridge, but our opponent is attacking with 1/1s, 0/1s if they've got Noble Hierarch. So, like, unless we're literally empty-handed, Ensnaring Bridge is not going to do anything. So, I guess we'll bring in Plague Engineer. Run it back. I wish we had more hand hate spells for matchups like this, I think. Alright. This is notably better than our other hand. So, start Island, play Crab. Crab would be a good top deck, though. Okay, opponent untaps. Starts Forest Elf. We untap. We draw Glimpse the Unthinkable. Play Polluted Delta. Target our opponent. Safe targets always yield. Opponent mills land, Noble Hierarch. Fetch up a Swamp. Might of Old Karasa, Windswept Heath, Glistener Elf. So let's go ahead and Drown in the Loch. Drown in the Loch is our slightly more awkward kill spell here, simply because our opponent is playing Spell Pierce. Fatal Push, next turn we can Fatal Push with 3 mana, meaning that if our opponent has Spell Pierce for protection, we can get around to Spell Pierce. We get another Drown in the Loch, okay. Well, in that case, we just have double kill spell, and we're going to pass. Glimpse the Unthinkable is tempting, but I don't know that one kill spell is going to be enough, especially when killing an Inkmoth Nexus. Okay. Aether Gust, not bad. Because my opponent is now falling behind on lands, I am going to Glimpse the Unthinkable. They might be able to get around just a Fatal Push next turn, or they have Veil. Veil works too. That does prevent them from getting milled. Not a big deal, though. Okay, opponent plays a Wooded Foothills. If they animate an attack this turn, we're basically going to kill that on our end step or when our opponent taps out. On their end step, excuse me. So they get in for 1, no blocks. 1 Infect. Okay, on their end step, Fatal Push. Opponent does have 7 cards in hand, so they likely have a spell to protect this with. Breeding Pool. Untapped. Vines. Okay. We untap. We draw another Fatal Push, which is good. We're going to go ahead and Glimpse the Unthinkable. Pass the turn. Milling a ton of action, but our opponent only needs 1 creature. So what are they playing this turn? If we draw another blue source, we can have double 2-mana spell. Okay, opponent plays a Blighted Agent. We're going to wait, and we're going to kill this on our turn. Well, the very first thing I'm going to do is actually Visions of Beyond. Okay. Play an island, mill our opponent. Might of Old Karasa. Okay, now we Fatal Push. Okay, opponent has a Vines of Vastwood. So we can Aether Gust Vines. Because I know they have 1 in their graveyard. And if they don't use it to pump next turn, we can Extirpate to get rid of that protection prior to Drown in the Loch. And because Extirpate has Split Second, we can actually... oh, they put it on the bottom of their deck. Okay, so they're not intent on redrawing that super quickly. Okay, opponent plays a Breeding Pool. We could be dead here. If my opponent has like a Might of Old Karasa and a Scale Up. Might of Old Karasa. They attack for 5. If they have a Groundswell, we're dead. Okay, they don't have Groundswell. We untap. We draw Shelldock Isle. So play Shelldock Isle. Mill our opponent. Okay, Hideaway. We're going to put Field of Ruin underneath it. Okay, so what we need to do is after our opponent animates their land, we need to Extirpate whatever their most likely protection spell is. So we'll let them attack. No blocks. Blossoming Defense. Okay, so we either Extirpate Veil of Summer, of which we've seen 2. Vines of Vastwood, we know 1 is on the bottom of their deck. I think we hit Veil. This is bad if my opponent has Spell Pierce in their hand. They have Spell Pierce and 2 more Blossoming Defense. Alright, well, we weren't beating that. And we definitely weren't beating... Even if we'd cast Drown in the Loch first, we couldn't beat Mystical Dispute or a second Blossoming Defense. So, like, there was no card we could extirpate here that actually would have mattered. Which is really disappointing. Who knows? Maybe my opponent F6'd. Oh, I guess I could have... no, that wouldn't work. That didn't work because they have 2 counterspells. I was going to say, if I had extirpated Blossoming Defense and countered Blossoming Defense, but unfortunately, this is how the Infect do. Well, that one wasn't a close match, but after losing to Burn and being in the loser's bracket, you do play against less meta choices. So here's the thing. If you're set up to play meta decks, like play against meta decks, and you lose, and you're in the loser's bracket, you are now playing against decks you are not set up to beat. Which means you're going to have a tougher time than you normally would, provided those decks are like tier 2 decks. And Infect, I don't know if Infect is tier 1 or tier 2, or what the technical classification is, because I know it's a good deck. But we do not have choices set up in our deck that make playing against it good. Okay, I'm glad I mulliganed. I will keep this hand. I'm going to put back an Obero. We're going to start with an Inquisition. Let's see what our opponent's doing. Birds of Paradise, okay. So Darkslick Shores, Inquisition. Inquisition, okay. It's Ponza! So get rid of Pillage, pass the turn. But it has Forest, Stomping Ground, Bloodbraid Elf, so they play a Stomping Ground tapped this turn. And then they pass. We draw... We're playing Mesmeric Orb pretty much no matter what this turn. Okay, draw Polluted Delta, so play Polluted Delta, fetch up an island, and play Mesmeric Orb. Okay, opponent untaps. They're going to mill 2, or mill 1, excuse me. They mill Clothis, so they play a mountain, they play Bloodbraid Elf. So we know they're holding Forest Karn, and they get in for 3. Okay, we untap, we mill 2, milling Surgical and an Inquisition. So play Shelldock Isle, putting Archive Trap underneath it. Play Mesmeric Orb. Our opponent is going to mill 10 on their untap. Okay. Opponent is playing Blood Moon, worth noting. They pillage a Mesmeric Orb, and they get in for 4. Take 4, go to 12. We untap and mill 3. We draw Field. So... play Polluted Delta, fetch up a Swamp, glimpse the Unthinkable, our opponent, and now we have a Pocket Archive Trap and a Drown in the Loch, and I think we just Drown in the Loch. My opponent's Karn is the plan. Okay, they play a Stomping Ground. I think they played the Forest last turn. They shock it in. They want it coming in untapped. They attack for 4. We go to 7. And they're not going to play anything else, huh? In that case, we're going to kill Bloodbraid. Untap, we mill 4. We draw an island. Play a field. Pass the turn. Opponent paying 5, and they're going to mill 6 on their untap. Okay. We are just going to activate Shelldock Isle. Milling our opponent for 13, leaving them with 3 cards in their deck. Now we're going to field them, take them off of a mana, and our opponent basically has to kill us this turn. Fielding here was okay because our opponent, 1, still had a card in their deck. So if they tap any permanents and don't kill us this turn... Opponent says, of course, the day after I cut elixirs from my sideboard. JKGG. Alright. We do have to be aware our opponent is playing Blood Moon. So versus our opponent's deck, I think Aether Gust needs to come in out of the side. I think Plague Engineer might be good. Actually, maybe not. Plague Engineer, we don't play like... It's not like we're playing Plague Engineer early. I will bring in Ashiok, though. I think Ashiok are going to be quite good. And I'm going to cut... probably Surgical, Cling to Dust, Extirpate, and maybe we only run in 2 Ashioks and then drop. We're gonna go down to 1 Surgical. Okay. Yeah, I think this is a fine opener. We'll keep. Unfortunately, no early interaction, but plays Forest, plays Arbor Elf. We draw Mesmeric Orb. Play Dark Slick Shores. Pass the turn. So if my opponent has a Stomping Ground into a Pillage, we're going to be sad. Blood Moon, not as much, but it would still suck. So this is not a Pillage. It is a Klothys. I am just going to cantrip here. Okay, the basic Swamp is not bad. We untap and draw Shelldock. So play Swamp, Glimpse the Unthinkable, pass the turn. Hopefully with us being tapped out, my opponent decides that, hey, playing a fetch land here would be very nice. They exile Birds of Paradise, we lose 2, they gain 2. They play Wooded Foothills, they fetch with Wooded Foothills, they find a Stomping Ground, untapped, and they're going to play a 4-drop. It's Bloodbraid, cascading into another elf. Okay. So now we Archive Trap. They are playing Boil. Thankfully, this is a deck that Boil is not as good against, because we don't have, like, a complete critical mass of islands. What is our best play here? Mesmeric Orb mills them for 5. We can Visions of Beyond and Mesmeric Orb. Or we can play Ashiok and deny them Klothys on their own cards, which would deny them mana. We could play Fraying Sanity, though they're not milling anything this turn. I think that one wouldn't be right. I think Mesmeric Orb Visions of Beyond. Okay, so now we have options for next turn. Opponent mills 5. Waiting on them to pick a card with Klothys. They pick Arbor Elf to drain us for 2. They pillage Mesmeric Orb, which is way better for them, or it's way better than them pillaging a land for us. We take a lot. We're down to 5. We draw Aether Gust. We might just have to Fatal Push Aether Gust this turn. So, because we can't kill them, we can take them down to 11 cards in deck. We're going to play a Shelldock Isle. We'll put a Mesmeric Orb underneath it. And pass the turn. Beginning of your pre-combat main phase. So on their draw step, we are going to Aether Gust Klothys. We're going to Aether Gust... We could Aether Gust Bloodbraid. That turns off Klothys, but we still take 2. I think that's the least amount of damage we can take. Okay, so on my opponent's draw step, Aether Gust Bloodbraid. They put Bloodbraid on top. So we are dead to Bolt currently. Opponent hits Stomping Ground for mana. That's not good. Seasoned Pyromancer. So this way they can draw Bloodbraid and play it. Is there anything we can do about that? We can Fatal Push an Arbor Elf. They have to tap all of their dorks for mana this turn. I think we're still dead. Because they can turn Klothys back on just by playing Bloodbraid, which they are now drawing because they put it on top. Okay, Bloodbraid, another Seasoned Pyromancer. And because Bloodbraid has haste, we die. Alright. Well, opponent got us fair and square. Game 3. What do we do here? Maybe we do bring in Set Adrift. Kind of like it a little better than Surgical. Alright, we'll play first. We have Shelldock, Glimpse, but that's not a lot. Yeah, I think we have to go to 6. Alright, this is slightly more interactive. We're going to keep, and we're going to put back a Field of Ruin. Start Dark Slick Shores, Inquisition. Let's see what our opponent has going on over here. Opponent has Braid, Lightning Bolt, Scooze, Pyromancer, Utopia Sprawl. We'll take Utopia Sprawl because it slows them down significantly. Opponent starts Misty Rainforest, trying to get that out of the way because we have Archive Traps. We untap, we draw Obero, play Watery Grave tapped, pass the turn. They play a Forest and Scavenging Ooze. We draw Drown in the Loch, which we can use to kill Scavenging Ooze. And if they don't draw land, then we can resolve an Ashiok uncontested, maybe? Alright, well, play Obero, pass the turn. Opponent plays a forest, so they can't play Seasoned Pyromancer, and they draw Arbor Elf. That will let them play Pyromancer next turn. They have another Arbor Elf, okay. So they go to combat. Oh, you know what? Drown in the Loch does not stop Skoos, because Skoos can just eat a card out of their grave. I did not think that through. Okay. So, kill an elf. Untap. We draw a swamp. So, play a swamp. Play Ashiok. Exile our opponent's grave. They probably just eat the Arbor Elf anyway, and then they can kill it by swinging. But if they're doing that and they don't draw a red source, they can't play Seasoned Pyromancer. Never mind. They draw so they can play Seasoned Pyromancer. Okay. Oh, they fetched with Wooded Foothills and could no longer get a land because they didn't kill Ashiok first. And they discard a Braid Bolt. They attack Ashiok down to 1. We untap. We draw Visions, which unfortunately does not synergize with Ashiok, so we're just going to hand trip here. We need to draw something else. Aether Gust is not bad. We could Aether Gust Pyromancer or Scavenging Ooze, and then if our opponent puts it on top, we can mill it. I think that's what we do here. So we're going to hit Skoos, because Skoos is scarier. It's going to do more damage in the long run. Okay, they eat Bolt out of their own grave. They do put it on top. Mill them with Ashiok. Mill Stomping Ground, Bolt, and Bone Crusher Giant. And we'll play Field of Ruin just in case we top deck a crab. We have the crab, then we can play a fetch land. Opponent plays Clothis. Attacks us for 5. We go to 13. We untap and draw another fetch land. Oh no, play fetch land. Pass the turn. Opponent exiles Ashiok, drains us to 11. They play a fetch land, they go to combat, they attack for 5, we go to 6. Unfortunately, Crypt Incursion doesn't do it. The other life gain spell we have doesn't do it, and we top decked another fetch land anyway. So we flood out, but hey, Ashiok did some cool things, right? I felt really bad losing the majority of our explosiveness. Like, we've janked out a couple of games here and there, but like, I think we need to be focused around super heavily milling our opponent. So I've probably been mulliganing incorrectly in that case, which would explain this deck's underperformance. This deck is a 5-0 list. It has 5-0'd, so it probably can 5-0 with a little bit of luck. This is probably like between a 3-2 and a 4-1 list, somewhere in that like power level, when piloted properly. I think with some tweaks, we could probably get it to be a little bit stronger. But this is not my particular style of mill, I think. Alright, I'll keep. Oh boy, another burn deck. So hopefully we can draw Crypt Incursion this time. Opponent gets in for 1. We take 1, go to 19. We draw Island. We'll play an Island, pass the turn. We might just be cantripping with a Visions of Beyond here. Okay, opponent plays a Sunbaked Canyon. Gets in for 1. We'll take 1. Go to 18. Opponent suspends a Rift Bolt. And suspends another Rift Bolt. Alright, well, Visions of Beyond. We are going to be taking a lot of damage next turn, so we need to get down this Mesmeric Orb, and fast. Okay, we get a Shelldock Isle. Play another Island. Play Mesmeric Orb. Pass the turn. Really hoping my opponent activates a fetch land this turn. So, opponent going to mill a bunch here. And by a bunch, I mean 3 cards. They mill Boros Charm, which is good, because that's their like most heavily damaging spell. They mill a Skullcrack. Main deck Skullcrack. Okay. And a Skewer. So 3 action spells. Okay, now we've got 2 Rift Bolts coming off Suspend. We're going to take at minimum 9 damage this turn. Okay. So Rift Bolt hits us for 3. Prowess Trigger. Okay. Rift Bolt hits us for 3. Prowess Trigger. Come on, play a fetch land and activate it. We need you to. Skewer. So what is that? Lethal? No. So we're going to 5 life here. We'll be going to 1 if my opponent has another bolt. Okay, fetch lands offline. My opponent had the 1 mana burn spell Dream. We go to 1. And we can't even get black mana to play a Crypt Incursion. You know what? I'm going out on my own terms. Pay our last life to a polluted delta, and we're going to game 2. Oh man, well that's the burn nuts. That's what burn wants to do. So fraying sanity going to be a little slow. We'll bring in Aether Gust just to have a little more interaction. Oh shoot, no, I definitely did not mean to take out a Crypt Incursion there. Maybe we try bringing in an Ensnaring Bridge. I still don't think it's right, because like my opponent's just going to dump their hand before we ever have the chance. Why do I have 61 cards? I'm going to go down and extirpate. We'll try it like this. I think Surgical is actually pretty important versus Burn because it gets rid of a lot of their, like, you know, duplicate spell shenanigans. The trick is, with this deck, we don't have Thought Scour, so we don't have a way to get cards into our opponent's grave early other than Hedron Crab. So, like, the earliest we can start milling them is on turn 2. Otherwise, we have to rely on the spells that they play, which are, like, one-off spells. We start with a Crypt Incursion, so I'm going to keep this. Hopefully it's going to be fast enough with 2 Glimpse the Unthinkables. So we start Shelldock Isle, and we're going to put a Visions of Beyond underneath it. So that'll be our way to reload. Opponent plays an Inspiring Vantage and a Goblin Guide. Okay, so they attack us for 2. Let's see if we draw a land. We do not. Surgical Extraction on top of our deck. So we draw Surgical, shock Watery Grave, and Glimpse the Unthinkable. 2 Lava Spikes, 1 Rift Bolt. I think at my opponent's draw step, I'm going to attempt to Surgical Rift Bolt or Skewer the Critics. I'm actually going to Rift Bolt. I'm going to Surgical Skewer the Critics here. I think that's the spell that my opponent is most likely to have in their hand of 7. They also can't cast it in response, which is one reason why I picked this and not like... Well, they don't have any lightning bolts, but... Okay, opponent does have 1 in hand and 1 in deck. So they're holding 1, 2, 3 bolts and a Helix. 2 lands. Let me get out the old snipping tool so I can keep track of this, because Surgical does not let you reveal... Or Surgical does not reveal your opponent's hand. Okay, just move this over here. Alright, opponent's turn. They play Sunbaked Canyon. They go to combat. They get in for 2. Mesmeric Orb on top of our deck. So the plan this turn is we're going to Fatal Push and Glimpse. Because we need more creatures in our opponent's grave to gain more life to undo all of these bolts our opponent's playing. Okay, they cast straight up Lightning Bolt. Oh, actually, we might have to just gain life this turn, because they're holding land and 6 damage and 3 mana of burn spells. So we have to cast Crypt Incursion here. Unless we draw... I'm trying to think. No. Oh, we were drawing Mesmeric Orb. Okay, never mind. So, yeah, the only way we get out of this is by gaining life. Opponent only has 2 creatures in grave, which is very suboptimal for a Glimpse the Unthinkable. But we fetch a basic swamp. And we Crypt Incursion. Gaining 6. Pass the turn. Next turn we can Mesmeric Orb and then Fatal Push Goblin Guide, which hopefully our opponent... So our opponent basically will end up dumping their hand here except for 1 card. The attack, we reveal Inquisition of Kozilek. Okay, that's not really a card we wanted to draw in this position. So they play their Arid Mesa. They crack it. And I assume they play Lava Spike and Lightning Helix this turn, just to get them out of their hand. That leaves us at 3. Okay, so they're holding Lightning Helix. We draw Inquisition. So, Fatal Push Goblin Guide. And we're going to have to Glimpse the Unthinkable here. I think we got a little unlucky on that first Glimpse, not reveal it. Because if that Glimpse had revealed another creature, we probably would have been fine. Or if we'd have been able to Fatal Push that Goblin Guide prior to... Okay, opponent cast every spell we knew about. So we're going to 3. Opponent will have 3 draws to hit a Lightning Bolt, which, considering 90% of their deck is a Lightning Bolt, I think we're dead. The only way that this doesn't kill us... Rest in peace. Oh, that's actually really brutal. Because we can no longer Visions of Beyond for a ton of cards or anything like that. Opponent does have one card in hand. I think we do have to Inquisition. It's a path. That doesn't really matter. So we play Mesmeric Orb. Opponent untaps. They mill 3. Sunbaked Canyon, Inspiring Vantage, Rift Bolt. But it does get a second draw. Sunbaked Canyon, Fiery Islet, they get a third draw. And they found Lightning Helix, which unfortunately puts a capstone on the match. So we won round 1, and I had high hopes. 1-2ing, it was close both times it happened. I think with a little better luck and maybe different tech choices, we could have pretty easily won any of those games. Infect and the Burn matchup, I think on this one we got a little unlucky. We should have gone to game 3. Like I said, had we milled one more creature, or if we'd had 1 mana at any point to Fatal Push that Goblin Guide, we would have gained 3 more life and taken 2 less damage on a hit, which means we would have been 2 burn spells from lethal, and our opponent would have had 11 cards left in their deck after that last glimpse. So like that one I'm going to count as close, even though it was an 0-2 match. So let's take a look at this deck, shall we? I like Mill. I love playing the deck. It's a fun strategy. This one, I think Drown in the Loch is too slow. It's a powerful card. It does a lot of things. But I think the 2-mana kill spell aspect of it is just, it's not good enough. I would much rather have, the 4th Inquisition, the 4th Fatal Push, like maybe even a Thoughtseize. It's just stronger in a deck. Because I think Mill wants to be a proactive Dimir deck. You shouldn't have reactive answers. I mean, to an extent you need to, because you have to be able to interact with the board, so you need things like Fatal Push. But I think this deck does not have enough powerful mill spells. I would cut Drown, add the 4th Fatal Push, the 4th Inquisition, a Thoughtseize, and then maybe even like a Mind Funeral, or a Trapmaker Snare, something to get at Archive Trap. It's interesting because this is a recent deck list that 5-0'd that didn't have like mission briefing. They weren't all in on buying back Archive Trap, because as we saw, there were a few decks that like didn't have fetch lands or like refused to play them anyway. So Archive Trap was not as good as it could have been. I also would like to see the 3rd Crypt Incursion in the sideboard. I think Cling to Dust in the main deck is actually fantastic. I like having the Cling to Dust. Trying to think if there's anything else I would do to this deck. Ensnaring Bridge I think is a necessary evil, but as we saw, it was really slow. We weren't dumping our hand fast enough, and I feel like that was because we have Drown in the Lochs and not 1-mana spells. I know I played this deck suboptimally. I really think this deck is better than I showed it off to be, and I think with some minor tech choices like and changes and tweaks, this could actually be a really, really good mill list. I'm happy that I got to play it, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. So let me know if you did. Leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel if you're so inclined, and remember, if you want to catch me streaming decks like this live, tune in to me on Twitch Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I stream a lot of jank. We play some limited sometimes. It's a lot of fun. And yeah, I hope to see you guys next time. Bye!